What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another very exciting episode right here on the MIgardener channel. In today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 different ways to organically control and suppress weeds. Now, this was brought up because in the last episode when we were planting out the garden, I had expressed that we had some issues with weed pressure as it pertained to Canadian thistle. Now, Canadian thistle is a very hardy weed. It's one that you don't want to encounter, but it did bring up the discussion of, well, if I do get weeds, what are some organic approaches to controlling them that I can implement in my garden? And so in today's episode, like I said, I'm going to be sharing with you 6 different ways that you can control weeds in your garden. Let's go. All right, so the first way that you can remove weeds is the most obvious, and that's through physical removal. Now, this is the method that we've been using to get rid of our Canadian thistle just because of how entrenched it is and the way that it multiplies and spreads throughout the garden. You see, a lot of weeds, they spread via their seeds, but there are some weeds that spread via the root system. Things like grasses, like puzzle grass, sawgrass, tiger grass, different like weedy grasses will spread this way, but also thistle will spread this way. Some dandelions will also spread this way, where the root system actually sends off a rhizome under the soil, and that rhizome grows another plant. And so those can actually be very invasive in the garden. And so sometimes the most successful way to remove them from your garden is just by physically removing them. So you can come in and just dig the root system up. Now, I will also do this for weeds that are not very difficult to dig up. You'll see these big sunflower seedlings. I'll come by and pull them up with my hand or dig them up with a shovel. Physically removing them, it's the most organic way, but it does take the most time. So that's the first way. All right, the second way that you can control weeds is by using a spray. Now remember, this is organic, so we're not gonna be using anything harmful or synthetic. We're gonna be using distilled vinegar. What you wanna do is you wanna go buy the cheapest distilled vinegar that you can find, a big jug of it. You wanna use pure distilled vinegar. Do not dilute this in water. What you're going to do is you're going to put it either in a hand sprayer or a pump sprayer, and you're going to spray the weeds. What this is going to do is it's actually going to burn the leaves with acid. Vinegar is very acidic, and when it lands on the leaves, it's actually going to cause the surface of the leaf to start to burn, and when it burns, it can't photosynthesize, and it ends up dying back. So what you want to do is just spray during a period of dry weather, and preferably when the sun's out, because the sun is actually going to it's actually going to increase the potency of the spray. We're going to just spray the weeds. Like in our case here, this creeping Charlie is very, very invasive. It's in the mint family. It just crawls along the ground and just grows like crazy. But we're going to spray it down, wait till the leaves are pretty much just dripping with it, and then we're going to let it dry, let it do its thing. And within 24 to 48 hours, we should start to see the plants dying back. Now, the really nice thing with using distilled vinegar is there is no residual at all. There's no residual that's going to affect future plants. So if we were spraying in our garden beds, we can actually kill the weeds off, and then the very next day we can go and plant something and there's going to be no problem at all, because the thing is that the leaves are being burned. But once the vinegar actually interacts with the garden soil, there's very little acid left to affect the future plants. So any acid found in the vinegar is going to be basically buffered by the pH of the soil. That's what's really nice about using vinegar, is there's zero residual whatsoever. So that's the second way, my second favorite way to control weeds in the garden organically. Let's move on to the third way now. All right, the third method of controlling weeds is through smothering. Now, smothering takes some time. It's not an immediate method by any means, but it is probably the most effective method. In fact, you may have accidentally smothered a part of your yard when you left a kiddie pool out for too long. I know that we've done that. And basically, you move the kiddie pool or you deflate it to put it away, and you realize, oh my gosh, there's like a complete dead patch in the middle of my yard, or all the grass is really yellow, and then all of a sudden it starts to die and wither once the sun comes out, because it hasn't seen sunlight in so long that it ends up killing it. And that's a process of smothering. You might have also smothered your yard out when you left a pile of fall leaves for too long or something like that, and it ends up killing it. So smothering, like I said, is very effective. It just takes time, and all you have to do is block the sunlight from accessing the plants, or the plant's accessing the sunlight. And so when you create that, that barrier, it actually smothers them out. Now we have a chipping green here that we've left on our yard for about, I don't know, a year and a half or so. And you don't have to leave it on for a year and a half. 2 to 3 weeks will start to be very effective. But what you'll notice when we pull this back after a year and a half, check this out. Isn't that amazing? There is not a single weed, blade of grass, nothing. It is completely void of life. And that's because it's been totally smothered out by this chipping green here. So very, very effective, and one that like I said, if you have the time, it is highly effective, and it's totally organic. It does work, but you just need some time. So 2 to 3 weeks is really all you need to do. You don't need a chipping green to do this. You can do this with just a basic tarp is fine. You can also do this with things like cardboard. You can just cover your weeds up with 2 or 3 layers of cardboard. Cardboard sheet mulching is a thing that a lot of people do to cover a big area of their garden. So that's a very effective way of smothering out weeds. And it's one that you can use with great success in your garden. All right, the fourth method of weed suppression is through solarization. Now, market gardeners have been doing this for a very long time, and it actually uses some components of smothering and adding in a component of heat into the equation. So the idea is that the sun is basically a heat source. And that solar radiation, when it beams down onto a black surface, it heats up very hot. And when you can cover soil that might have weeds in it with a black tarp, it not only voids the sun from touching the weeds, but it also heats up and then burns the weeds. So it smothers as well as heats. And it's great because what it does is it actually kills off any weeds that are growing, but it also heats the soil up to kill any dormant weed seeds. So it's very effective. The only downside is that it can also kill beneficial bacteria and fungi. With smothering just basically suffocates the weeds. It just blocks out any sunlight at all, but you don't have any heat. And so there are still tons of beneficial bacteria and fungi in that soil, despite the weeds being gone. And because they don't need the sunlight they don't need the sunlight to really survive. The temperature is a much bigger regulator of their survival than the sunlight is. And so when you heat up the soil, you do end up killing some of the beneficial bacteria and fungi. So weigh your pros and cons. If it's a big area of land, sometimes solarization is the way to go, but do understand that if you do it on a regular basis, you're going to end up kind of killing and sterilizing your soil. So just some things to kind of consider, but it is organic and it is very effective. All right, the fifth way to control weeds organically is by using salt. Now, salt is something that I do not recommend using in the garden. Plants actually do not survive well in a highly salinic environment. And what it does is it actually draws water away from the cells. If you've ever taken a bowl of strawberries and like maybe a bowl of cucumbers or something, and you added salt, because I don't know why you'd add salt to strawberries, but sugar does the same thing actually. You can actually add sugar to a bowl of strawberries and you end up with a bunch of juice at the bottom. But conversely, if you take a bowl of cucumbers and you sprinkle some sea salt over top and watch what happens, it will draw a ton of that water out of the cucumbers and you end up with a big bowl of juice at the bottom. And that's all the water being absorbed out of the cell. The same thing happens in the soil if you take like a teaspoon of salt and apply it to a weed. Now, you don't need a teaspoon. You could probably do fine with about a half a teaspoon. That highly salinic environment actually ends up dehydrating the weed and kills it. The problem is you don't want to do this in your yard or your garden because it will also kill your grass and your vegetables. And there is what's known as residual. And residual is what I talked about in the very beginning with vinegar, is that vinegar, there's no residual. With salt, there is. That's because salt is a mineral. It actually stays in the soil unless it's flushed out. Now, you can flush it out over time with lots and lots of water. It will dilute it and flush it, and then you can dilute it and flush it again. It will eventually leave the soil, but if you have something like a sidewalk or brick pavers or things like that, that is very effective to controlling weeds in between brick pavers or in your sidewalk or driveway where you otherwise might not want them. So it is a very effective way of controlling weeds. It's just not one you want to use in the garden. All right, the sixth and final way to control weeds in the garden organically is with cornmeal or grits. Now, cornmeal and grits contain a chemical known as an axon inhibitor. This is a very fancy term that botanists and horticulturists use to define growth tips. Simply put, they are growth tips. You have growth tips in roots as well as growth tips in shoots. So the branches of plants have axons and the roots of plants have axons. And when you apply an axon inhibitor, it just inhibits them. It just stops them. And that ends up stunting the plant. And so if you apply cornmeal and grits to the perimeter of a plant, of a weed, it actually will stunt the growth. You'll notice that over time, the leaves will begin to kind of curl and furl inwards. Then when the sun comes out and they get nice and dry from not getting any rain, they kind of just curl and die inward. And it's a great way to control weeds because it actually has very little residual on plants that you want to keep, and you can use it within close proximity of plants that you want to grow. Now, with close proximity, I do want to be very careful and note that if you have plants like this garlic here that's planted 4 inches apart, a little too close for using cornmeal. But anything like 7 to 8 inches, or even a little bit more than that, you're totally fine. And that's because cornmeal does not affect a wide swath. It only affects very locally to where you're applying it. And so assuming you just keep the cornmeal focused right around the weeds that you want to kill, it has very little effect on the surrounding plants. So that's 6 ways to control weeds in the in the garden organically. Oh man. So there you go. There are 6 ways to control weeds in the garden organically. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you did, make sure to throw 2 thumbs up, 2 big green thumbs up. That helps spread this video around. And make sure to share this video with a friend if you think they'd enjoy it. Also, if you've not yet subscribed, make sure to do that. We are just getting started with our gardening content. As you can see, the garden is growing behind me. We got most of the garden planted out. And so within the next couple months, we're going to be pumping up the content. The garden's going to be growing, and it's going to be a great time. So make sure to join the fun by clicking that subscribe button. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home, and we'll catch you all later. See ya.